I do not hope you believe everything I am about to tell, but I thank you for your attention. From what I have heard, from what I have read, it is common to think that ghosts are attached to a place, to a specific physical space, the place where they lived when they were alive. Others say that the place where they died. I think we've all heard the story of someone who encounters the appearance of a spirit when they arrive to live in a new place. For some reason, we always see ourselves as invaders, and these entities as the legitimate inhabitants of a place. Beyond fear, I think there is a certain empathy with ghosts, as if in the background we would like to think that they have no bad intentions. That is why my story, what I am going to tell you, is strange. It is more out of the ordinary. It is something that I would not know how to explain. I am going to tell you what my family has lived through for just over 2 years. I remember exactly the first time I noticed it, although I think that for all of my family, the beginning was marked in a different moment. For me, it was that time, a Sunday night when we were getting ready to watch a movie. My dad is a great movie fan and still keeps hundreds of VHSs from some video rental stores that he had until 2005, more or less, when he stopped being profitable. My sister and I had chosen The People Behind the Walls by Wes Craven. After a few minutes of watching the movie, something caught our attention, a little voice singing a song, The Blue Star of Pinocchio. We took a moment to realize that that voice, what seemed to be a girl singing, humming, did not come from the television. My dad stopped the movie and looked at me, completely confused. "Stay here," he told us, and began to check carefully, room by room, the whole house. I'm not sure why, but there was something in that voice that terrified us, that made us realize that it was not something good. It is not part of our instinct to be scared by the sound of a girl humming a song, except perhaps when you know that there is no girl in your house. When he checked the last corner, he stopped singing, but I have never been able to stand listening to that song, and I have not even thought of seeing Pinocchio or The People Behind the Walls on that occasion. My dad wanted us to continue. He put the film on and we all pretended to watch it as if nothing had happened, but deep down we knew that something had changed forever. I remember that even the popcorn had a bitter taste that night. There is some hopelessness, a certain feeling that no one can help you when you know there is something that is not alive, living in your house. 2 or 3 days later, a desperate scream from my mother woke me up in the middle of the night. Seconds later, the voice of my father, trying to calm her, I ran to my parents' room. My sister was already there, standing at the door. My mom was crying, sitting next to the bed, and my dad hugged her and squeezed her against her chest. He told us to go to Grandma's room and sleep together there. That room had been uninhabited since Grandma died years ago, but it kept all her things intact. It's also the only room on the second floor without windows, and that is precisely why my father had sent us there. In the morning we knew what had provoked the cry of my mother. She had a nightmare. She dreamed again of that first night when we heard the girls' song, but in the dream my mother was alone looking for the whole house. Something made her desperately seek that girl. Suddenly, a screaming scream scared her, a scream that stunned her, as if it came from inside her own head. She opened her eyes, waking up to realize that it was she who was really screaming, and right in front of her, in the window of that room on the second floor, the face of a girl without eyes, smiling ear to ear as she seemed to float, just to observe her. My dad woke up at that moment. The difficult thing for him was to calm my mom and convince her that there was nothing in the window, when he could also see it. This thing that I know is not a girl, suddenly came to our house and decided to live there, to torment us. Although I cannot say that before we did not believe in ghosts, the truth is that we had never experienced anything like something supernatural. My parents began to live permanently stressed, beyond the financial problems that worried my father above all. Sometimes we could be good, even joking, until we noticed that the sun was starting to set. What happened at night? The girl began to be less shy with us. The first time I saw her, I walked across the dining room to the living room. I took my computer to do a task and turn on the television like a background noise. A bad habit I have. I glanced at a white stain on the table, as if it were an animal on it. I stopped in a hurry. A laugh almost caused me a heart attack. I didn't turn around, I was frozen, but with the edge of my eye I could see what seemed to be a girl in a white dress, sitting as if she were a gargoyle on the table, as if she were getting between her knees, cutting her hands as if they were a fly, and smiling. I don't know how, but I can swear by my life that she was smiling. She got up, standing on the table little by little. That thing, with the appearance of a girl, got up, and I'm sure it didn't fit, that it crouched its head when it reached the ceiling. We were alone, my sister and I. I don't know how, I don't know why, but my only reaction was to talk to my mom, to yell at her. My sister heard me and ran up to me, and that thing vanished into thin air. Or so we feel. I feel that it is very significant that in that panic attack I spoke to my mom. Although I was not, I still do it now, every time I feel like this. I still do it, even though my mom is no longer with us. They say ghosts can't hurt you, but I'm a witness to how these energies were consuming my mother, little by little, night by night, until one day she couldn't take it any longer. 3 months after it all began, this thing was becoming more and more visible, from the other people's point of view, placing itself behind us and then disappearing, but it appeared in front of my mother. She described her as a girl with an old-fashioned face, sometimes without eyes, with his skin getting more and more rotten, but always with a macabre smile. It was a Tuesday like any other. I had spent my whole afternoon with my girlfriend, and at 7:30 I received that call from my dad. My mom had decided to commit suicide, hanging in the grandma's room, the only place where that thing didn't go in. My sister found it shortly after. The ambulance people told my father that he had died just a few minutes before my sister's call for emergencies. That detail, for months, only he and I knew. We didn't want to torment my sister with the idea that if she had arrived a few minutes earlier she might have been able to save my mom, but we told her. We told her when she told us that damn day she had taken longer to enter because when opening the door someone pushed her from inside and laughed. That little girl laugh, the same laugh we all hear every night, as if it were making fun of us. I would like so much that this were fiction, that it was only in my head. When there is a loss like this, when someone decides that they can't take it anymore, the reaction of distant family members, those who are out of the circle the most immediately, is to think that the family had something to do, that the family could do something to prevent it. It happened to us. Suddenly we saw each other more alone than ever. My mom's family practically stopped worrying about us from the funeral. My mom never told them everything that was happening. And let's be realistic, think about it for a moment, seriously, and answer with all sincerity. Would you do it? Would you ask for help because there is a spirit tormenting you at home? And in this loneliness, that thing with the appearance of a girl seemed to strengthen. He began to look like my sister, who became his favorite person to bother. Somehow, that entity checked my sister's things. We returned from lunch at my father's friend's house to meet with my sister's diary open, with letters and memories thrown all over the house, with one of her dolls in my father's room. Things that were well stored in my sister's closet had been taken out, handled and appeared dirty all over the house. My sister cried desperately while we helped her to rearrange everything. My dad went to the floor below for a broom and the pickaxe to lift some crystals and returned pale. He returned with the dress of First Communion of my sister between his arms. In the darkness of the room, he said he had seen the dress floating, standing, as if someone barely invisible would have put it on. When the light was on, the dress was already on the floor, with a horrible, disgusting smell of rot. I want to clarify that changing houses is something that we cannot afford. It is something that is even out of discussion, especially because this is my mother's house. The house where we grew up, and we are not going to leave it because that crap has decided to live here. It's not going to win us. Praying, blessing, cleaning the house, my sister and my mom had already noticed it. When they were too scared and began to pray, this thing seemed to have fun, seemed to take advantage to make fun of them. Although we never thought it was going to solve something, my dad spoke to a priest, a very close friend of my mother's family. He accepted to come to bless the house. Evidently, my dad did not explain well what was going on, and I suppose the father thought it was more about dealing with the loss of a loved one in the place where he decided to take his life. He came accompanied by an old lady, Doña Carmen, who helped her in the church's work. She walked through the house, throwing blessings in Spanish, some in Latin, and left. That same night, already very late, someone knocked on the door. We were surprised to see that it was the old lady. He asked us to come over and we invited him for a coffee. He asked us to be honest and tell him what was actually going on in the house. And I think it was the first time we were really honest with someone outside the family. Mrs. Carmen inspired us so much trust, and she really proved it to us that we ended up in tears, telling her absolutely everything that had happened. The girl did not stop laughing. At 3 in the morning, the old woman left for her house, and despite the fact that my father offered to take her, she refused. They have to be strong and take care of each other more than ever, he told us. The next morning he presented himself with holy water, religious figures and a man already very old, but who transmitted a calm that we really needed. He was a retired priest and Doña Carmen had put him aware of the situation. The Lord was very concerned that this thing that he was avoiding in my house could have physically stopped the door on that occasion while my mother was agonizing. I have seen too many things in my life, and many of them I still do not understand, he told us. I believe in God and I have seen the devil, and among us there are many beings that came escaping from hell. He stayed all day. We left a large part of the afternoon and returned at night. He was still in the house, already very exhausted, and told us that at this point he lacked the strength to face such a being. Despite that, he promised to return to the house every month, to bless her, to try to free her from those forces, from those things, as many times as necessary. And yes, 3 days we were in peace, 3 days. Until the others arrived. We sought to leave as long as possible. We even visited friends of my father, whom we had years without seeing, some with whom I'm sure he didn't even get along so well. On one of these visits, my dad received a call. It was a neighbor. Something was happening in the house. I received a WhatsApp message from my uncle Jose Antonio, my mother's brother, who has a small restaurant a few blocks from my house. He asked us to go there immediately. When we got home, we found what seemed to be all the neighbors outside our house, who were with the doors open, with all the lights on and with shadows walking through the windows. A few hours earlier, horrible screams began to come out of my house, desperate screams of pain and others with laughter and full of vulgarities. The neighbors left their houses to get closer, but no one dared to enter. Someone called the police. A neighbor only ran to the restaurant of my uncle to tell him that something was happening with us, or at least that's what they thought. When he arrived and heard the screams, he broke one of the windows, without a doubt, and entered. He got lost in the darkness while the neighbors watched from the outside. The screams went quiet a little later, but he didn't leave. Minutes later, 2 patrols of the municipal police, alerted by the neighbors, forced the door to enter. They found my uncle unconscious and gave him first aid. When we arrived, the neighbors were rolling around in the small entrance of the garden and my uncle received attention in an ambulance. The shadows we saw through the windows were at least 3 agents who checked from top to bottom the whole house. When he saw us, my uncle approached us and hugged us like he had not done for a long time. He hugged us hard. He told us that he came in to look for us and the house was much darker than what would be normal. Despite being a full moon night, nothing was seen inside. The lights did not turn on. I ran to the second floor from where the screams came from, and there, right at the entrance to my grandmother's room, illuminated just by the light of the window at the end of the corridor, a girl with an old face, smiling from ear to ear. The girl was holding a very tall woman, a naked woman with her skin falling off her body. He didn't believe what he saw and tried to turn on the lamp on his cell phone. By the time he did it, no one was seen at the door. He tried to run down, but something hit him in the stomach. He had run into something. Although he had it in front of him, he couldn't see it. The darkness was as if he had his eyes closed. He thought it was a piece of furniture and extended his hands to touch it. He touched a wet, hard ball. He felt a few hairs on it and a pile falling into contact with his fingers. Something laughed. Something laughed, and he felt the girl's laughter in his hands as he held her head. The next thing I knew, the next thing I saw, was a policeman trying to resuscitate him. I had never seen him like this, not even at my mom's funeral. My uncle cried while he told us what happened, like a child. My dad asked him that, in the face of those screams, what the hell had made him enter our dark house, to look for us instead of waiting for the police. He came in, he told us, because one of the voices he was screaming was that of my mother. I hate being in this house as much as I hate those who came to her to change our lives. The house where all our memories are, where I remember my mother, my grandmother, where I grew up. The same house that now the neighbors avoid, where people cross the street to avoid walking in front of it. Nobody visits us anymore. Nobody likes to be in a house where you can hear footsteps, where there is a voice laughing at you if for some reason you are alone at some point. In the bathroom downstairs, where the visits were, you can permanently hear the breathing of a woman. Since what happened with my uncle when the police came, some neighbors stopped talking to us, and I understand them. I would have done the same, every time I return from school and go through my uncle's back door. He asks me if there is someone at home. If I say no, he doesn't let me come alone. He prepares something to eat until my brother or my dad pass by, or until my cousin arrives and accompanies me. And my cousin, a friend of my brother, his girlfriend. Doña Carmen and Father Max are the only people who dare to enter my house yet. I told my father about what happened in my room, since the first time he came. On that occasion he dedicated, as I understood, to work and pray for the whole house, but when he returned he focused on my room and prayed a lot of time in there. At one point even, he called Doña Carmen to come in too. And it is that, a few minutes after starting the ritual, something began to bother him, according to Doña Carmen, while the father prayed on his knees next to the window. It was heard that something was falling on the ceiling. He continued, used to hearing even worse things in the house, but whatever fell began to drag. It sounded as if they were dragging on the ceiling, until I reached the corner of the room over my closet, the opposite of where he was. He heard the door slowly open. Without stopping his prayer, he turned, but he could not see anything, despite the fact that he felt in his chest a look that was stuck in him from the darkness of the closet. I don't know if my brother mentioned it, but here these senses can only be seen by eye, in the reflections of the windows, and sometimes in the mirrors. Only my uncle, who you see, and my mom saw them materialize in front of him. The father, knowing this, took my vertical mirror and placed it in the corner of the room, just in front of the closet door, and continued his prayer in front of him, to be able to observe what was happening in the dark. A figure was being drawn, as if approaching, preparing to leave. The minutes passed, and he thought that it could be his imagination playing a bad trick on him. He then stood in front of the window. He opened it out a few centimeters, enough to reflect just towards the closet door. He barely placed it. He saw a huge fat woman come out of him, with gray hair and a mess, walking past him so fast that he didn't have time to even see her face clearly. That's when he spoke to Mrs. Carmen. She was the one who told us everything the father saw. He only told me that it was preferable for me to go to sleep in my grandmother's room, That fat woman. That entity was the third to arrive. She does not go down to the first floor. We can recognize her heavy steps and her deep breath when we close the doors at night and she walks down the corridor. Sometimes it's so easy to forget everything, to think that everything is like before. I remember one day, particularly nice, that I had at school. And it is that, after what happened to my mother, it had cost me a lot to live. Even a little before, one of my best friends moved out of the city. That day that I tell you, my friends had me a surprise when leaving classes. Even the teacher did not let us leave a few minutes before. Everyone had agreed. Suddenly, I don't know where my friend came from. We hugged, we cried, then we controlled ourselves, we laughed. We all went to eat together. I realized how beautiful my group of friends is and how much I was losing myself not to live with them. We planned to meet the girls to make a pajama that night, and one of my friends brought me home in the meantime. He told me how much he cared, he told me how much he missed me, what hurt him that I was not with them as before. And I was very happy to feel so loved, supported. I came home and even the light that entered through the windows seemed to illuminate it in a different way, as it had not been for a long time. I came into my room and lay down. Because of the emotions of the day, maybe I fell deeply asleep in a matter of minutes, and I dreamed with my friends, or the boy who just took me home. I dreamed of the last vacation we had as a family, years ago. And suddenly, that laugh again, that stupid laugh that seemed to get into my dreams to tell me that nothing was right, that my house was still infested, that my mom is gone, that neither my brother, nor my dad, nor I are the same. That they missed us. I wanted to open my eyes and what I saw, I don't know if it was still between dreams, was that horrible fat woman floating right over me, right over my bed, stretching her arms towards me and screaming with her face because she could not hear her, but I could see her expression in her empty black eyes. I remember running, I remember leaving my room, my house and went to my uncle's restaurant to wait until my brother arrived. My cousin arrived there before and she accompanied me back home. They, my uncle's family, have also been getting used to living from outside what happens in this house, what happens to us. When arriving we went to my room for my cell phone and I had messages, lost calls. They were about to come for me for that pajamas that had moved me so much hours before. I took what was necessary when my dad arrived and I did not tell him what had happened to me. I saw him smiling and it is so strange that this happens now that I did not want to ruin the day for him. I asked for permission and before I could convince him, they were already talking to me outside. My dad smiled at me and shrugged his shoulders while I hugged him and ran away. We left my cousin at home and went to buy something to eat, and for a few hours I lived a normal life. I lived what any girl my age, I suppose, should live. Until they got there too. Until I suddenly saw, watching me from outside the window, that girl with an old-fashioned face smiling at me, wearing, I'm sure, my first communion dress. I felt I was going to faint, but somehow my desire to not be the rare, to no longer be the one who suffers, the one that always draws attention, they made me control myself and I pretended that nothing was happening. I pretended that I was not seeing her. I don't know how, but I did it, and I did it all night when we went to sleep, and I also pretended to be it. That's when at least I realized that no matter where we go, they will follow us. Weeks later, one afternoon, eating at my uncle's restaurant, waiting for my dad or my brother to come, I received a call. A boy from school, talking to me in an unusually serious tone, a boy from another classroom who is not aware of everything that has happened to me lately, except for my mom. Are you in a restaurant of your family? He asked me. Yes. Don't fuck, I heard him say it, followed by a long silence. Then he continued with a tone extremely nervous. Don't be scared, he said, some friends and I were playing the Ouija, just joking as always. Soon it seems that we are always talking to someone or something and that mentioned you, and he told us where you were right now, and he said he likes to live in your house. I want to write this as a farewell, as a thank you to all those who took care of us, to those who asked for our emails to write us their advice, also for those who know that when they heard this case. And yes, it is a farewell, because despite the support samples that I know we are no longer alone against this. Things have not improved since we decided to tell it. On the contrary, we have already told 12 different beings in the house. 5 of them arrived after the publication of our story. I wouldn't want to think that this is a consequence of this. Just a few weeks after we had a pretty quiet night, to be honest, too quiet. It felt, for a moment, as if all of this had just begun. We all talked here and remembered my mother. There were no steps, there were no laughter coming from an empty room, there were no breaths coming out of the darkness, nothing. Someone knocking on the door of my room woke me up after 2 in the morning. It was my sister asking for help. Something had happened to my dad. I jumped out of bed and discovered my dad lying at the end of the stairs. I thought he was unconscious, that's how he looked, but no, he could only not move. We called an ambulance and he arrived just a few minutes later. When we went out towards the ambulance, noticed that the neighbors saw us, some from their windows, others in the banquet, but none of them came to ask us what was happening. Maybe it's my imagination, but I felt the fear, the uncertainty in their eyes. While my sister and I followed the ambulance to the hospital, I remembered what my father could explain to us in the midst of the pain he felt. He was still reviewing things at work after he was talking to us until late. He went to the kitchen to leave his cup of coffee, and when he was going down the stairs, he heard a "hey" behind him, and he says it sounded like my voice. He saw nothing in the darkness. He went down a ladder and felt 2 hands pushing him down with force, and he fell in a very bad way. The sound woke my sister, who came out, and when she saw him she went to ask for my help, and that was the starting point for these things which have come can touch us, can influence us physically, and we are afraid, all of. With my father recovering from a broken arm and that injury in the back as a result of the fall, we received the call from Martin, son of a great friend of my father. Martin is about 10 years older than me, but I have known him since he was a child. He is a great person, a very good friend of my parents and of us, and with a tremendous faith in God. He and his family are Mormons. Martin offered to stay with us one weekend, in order to calm us down, to talk to us about God and stop seeing these things. I think he wasn't convinced that it was something real, what we were living. He even had to talk to Father Max and Doña Carmen, who had come to visit my father. The father talked a long time with Martin, and I felt that this changed a little his vision of the circumstances. We turned to attend to my dad. Then we met in the living room. We tried to watch TV, but no one was paying attention, so we decided to turn it off and talk between the 3 of us. I got lost in a magazine that I was watching, and Martin and my sister kept talking for a while. I heard Martin laugh in a very weird, almost macabre way, and then my sister kept quiet. I raised my eyes and Martin saw me with a very nervous smile. He continued talking, and the laughter repeated itself. There I saw that it was not him, someone was laughing through him. My sister and I got up and asked him to come with us, but he refused. He wanted to remain sitting there as if nothing were to happen, but we finally convinced him, although he kept trying to believe what had just happened to him. We had coffee. My sister said goodbye to go to her room, not before passing through my father's room to see if he needed anything. I asked Martin to tell me if he needed anything else, but he told me that everything was fine. I helped him to prepare one of the chairs so that he could sleep in it, and I went up to try to sleep something. A while later I heard a movement on the ground floor, and I thought it was Martin in the kitchen. The noises continued. I fell asleep, only to wake up with a fairly loud sound, something that fell. I didn't know if I should go down or not, if it would bother him, so I sent him a message a few minutes later to ask him if everything was fine, and he answered yes, that I shouldn't go down. I heard voices in the lower part, turned off, in the distance, slowly. I thought I'd go see what was happening, but then, the steps outside my door. The heavy steps and the tired breathing made me know that the fat woman was outside. So I held on, and fell asleep. The next morning, Martin spoke to my dad. He had a very tired face, as if he had not slept in days. Without telling me much, he left. But then I knew what happened to him. When he tried to sleep in the living room, he heard a breath coming out of the bathroom. This is normal for us, but evidently he did not know, he was not used to it. Without turning on the lights, he got up and went to the bathroom. He closed the door. When he was about to return to the chair, in the dark, he saw a silhouette hiding behind him, behind the chair where he was sleeping. Carefully, he approached the center table to take his cell phone. He turned on the lamp and slowly looked behind the chairs. There was no trace of anyone. He lay down and closed his eyes. At the moment of doing so, he felt someone climb up the couch, and before he could react, he felt a bite on his face, on his cheek, almost on his cheek. A bite from a toothless mouth. In the darkness, opening his eyes and fighting, he thought he saw an old woman on him, and as he could, he threw himself down the couch. He turned on the light in the room quickly, but there was no one. There were no traces of that old woman, or anything he felt on him. He left and tried to sleep in the car. From there, he could see how the curtains moved in my dad's room, as if someone was looking out. My father was alone and couldn't walk. It was then when he received my message and asked me not to leave my room. We are going to move from the house as soon as possible. Father Max will go to bless her, and I hope that we can be calm for a month, a week, a day, rest one night like before. It is all I ask. If something happens, I will tell you, but I hope not. I hope not to have to tell you many of the things that have remained in the inkwell. But know that if you don't know about us again, we will have had our happy ending.